Hey, what's up guys, Alex here, thank you for checking this video and welcome to another episode about Affinity Designer. So in this episode, I'm gonna show you how I approach a character design, and I'm gonna start by showing you my technique of outlining a character design and doing a little bit of standard shapes or like basic shapes before starting to add all the colors and all the stuff to make the character looks cool. This video comes from a lot of requests that I had below my previous video that I uploaded a while ago, and when I showed with a speed painting, a sort of like speed up technique, I just recorded my screen and then increase the speed of the video, how I created a character design like a cute ghost with Affinity Designer. So I started from a simple drawing that I did by hand, and then I just traced it, I created some colors, I created some reflections, some special effects, and then I completed the design of the character. A lot of you asked me to record this process at regular speed, like not at full speed or like not increasing the speed of the video. I thought it was going to be kind of boring, just like watch me painfully slowly tracing a character and adding colors and stuff, because I don't use like some hidden techniques or like some specific tips or tricks. It's just like regular standard work. But I noticed that the majority of the videos that you find online about character design are at a like higher speed, so they don't really show how much time it takes to do a character from scratch. So that's the purpose of this video. This is gonna be the first part, I guess, for like to show you how to create this character, and we'll see how it goes when we move along. But let's start by importing our character inside Affinity Designer. So let's open a new file that I have on my desktop that I loaded or downloaded from my Instagram account. This is an old sketch that I did during the Inktober competition of last year, 2015, and I call this the Turnip Man. I think it's pretty cute, and it would be interesting to turn these into sort of like render character with vector shape. So let's do it. Let's import this beautiful painting or this beautiful drawing. And by default, when you import file or an image inside Affinity Designer, automatically the software creates a layer that it's locked, a pixel layer locked called background. It's like the default settings of Affinity Designer. What we have to do here, we have to edit a little bit, because first you can see this is slightly tilted. It's like it's not perfectly straight. Then we have the pencil here, or like the pen, and it's not really good to start tracing something with this resolution, this type of contrast. Like this is really black and then we have this type of yellow background. So what we should do, we should edit a little bit this image to make it easier for us to trace it. So let's do it. First of all, let's unlock the layer. Let's switch to pixel persona and let's use the freehand selection tool, or you can select it with the L key. I just trace what I care about my design, so all my character, and I simply trace it. This doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be super accurate, just trace the character, everything that you only want to keep. And I usually do just like Command X and Command V, or Control X and Control V to cut the element and paste it on the same position. So now if we hide the layer underneath the background layer, we don't have anymore the background with everything else that we don't care. So we can delete this thing, we can delete this layer, and we just have the simple layer. By default, I'm gonna create, with going back with it to the draw persona, I'm gonna create a default element, a default rectangle that is gonna be 100% of the span of this drawing. I'm gonna put it underneath. I'm gonna call these BG, and I want this background to be completely white, and I'm gonna lock this background so I cannot select it by accident. Then the other thing that I want to do, now I have the background that is a vector rectangle, by default it's locked, and then I have this image, the Turnip man. Let's rename the layer. That is a pixel layer with the image that I want. That's perfect. So let's resize it a little bit. Let's rotate it to make it straight. Awesome. Now, because we are in a pixel layer, we can cancel this extra part if we want, going inside the pixel persona and using the eraser and canceling these extra stuff that are around our image. But this is not really important. I usually skip this part because I don't care mostly. First of all, what we have to do before continuing is saving. Always save, and save of course not flattened but as an Affinity designer type of file. So turnip man is gonna be saved, and that's perfect. Always remember, every time you do something, just save it. It's a really stable software. It's a really like secure, safe piece of software. It doesn't crash as much as it used to do Illustrator or Photoshop as well, but always save, like Control S, Command S, like learn this and just save constantly. Don't trust yourself, or try to trust yourself, whatever. So the other thing that I do on the image layer, I use a brightness and contrast type of adjustment layer that if you select the layer, you go down inside these adjustments type of micro menu, you click and you select the brightness and contrast, automatically a new layer is gonna be added, attached, like dependent to the layer that you selected. So if we open the turnip man layer that I have my background image, the pixel layer, you notice that we have this adjustment layer attached or dependent only to the turnip man, the main layer. So all the editing that I'm gonna do to this adjustment layer are gonna affect only this pixel layer that it's inside. So if we double click, we can reopen the panel, and what I do, I just like increase a lot the contrast and I increase a lot the brightness. So I basically remove completely the background that it was kind of yellowish, and also I remove all those extra details that right now I don't care because they could be kind of distracting. If I go back here or I simply just deactivate the adjustment layer, you can see here we have a lot of details, or like all these lines that in drawing are kind of cool because they create a little bit of extra dimension, they create a movement, they emphasize the shape of this drawing. But when we are at the first stages, when we have to trace this character, all these extra details are kind of distracting and they could throw us outside our initial purpose, that is just tracing the basic shape of this character. So let's remove those, and as you notice, this is not a disruptive type of adjustment. We can always deactivate it and go back to the original, so that's perfect as a starting point. Now we have our standard basic type of shape, and the last thing that I do before start tracing, I select the layer and I decrease the opacity a little bit, usually around 50%, just to have a better separation between the background image and the tracing, the vector tracing that I have on top. That's perfect. This is a perfect starting point. If you want to be safe, if you want to avoid to trace on the wrong layer or accidentally move the layer, just like you can select the pixel layer and lock it as well. It's pretty simple. Another thing that I suggest to do instead of just simply immediately starting tracing, so if we go back to the draw persona and we select the pen tool, if we start tracing and we see here what happens, like automatically Affinity Design creates a curve layer. If we deselect this and we select again the pen tool and we start tracing again, you see automatically Affinity Design creates another layer because we interrupted the previous curve of the previous vector element and we created a new one. So automatically Affinity Design creates a new layer every time we add a new element. I don't really want to do that because especially during the tracing part, we're gonna create a lot of different separated elements or different pieces, and this could be kind of like overwhelming, having all these different layers that keeps getting added to our layer panel. We don't want that, so in order to avoid this, what I suggest you to do is create a new vector layer or create a new regular layer, not a pixel layer. You can go in the layer panel below here, right at the bottom, and click add layer. By adding the layer, you're gonna have this as a sort of like group container. So every time you trace something or you create a new element, automatically the element will be added to the layer. So let's rename this layer with tracing, and then we can edit the properties of this layer. And the cool thing, we can have nice color, so it's gonna be like more obvious what type of layer we are working with. And you can see like this nice highlighted color in this layer panel, and it's easier to recognize, it's like more obvious, so it's kind of cool. Now if we create a new line and then we interrupt it, and then we create a new one and then we interrupt it, that's perfect. You see, Affinity didn't create all separated layers, but added all the layers inside our tracing type of layer group, or like regular layer that we created before. And this is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. And you notice by changing the color of this layer, we are affecting also the selection tool, highlighting color of these elements that are inside. And also in this case, like this like bright purple could be kind of disruptive, but because we are tracing something that was black and white, I always suggest to not use just black or like a really desaturated color. Just use a punchy, saturated, and really obvious color, so it's easier to find your trace or find your line, and you're not gonna get confused with the background color. So I guess after 10 minutes of talking and blobbing about nonsense, now it's time to start tracing these amazing characters. So first of all, let's start with the regular mouse. I'm using, if you can see here, I'm using just like the simple magic mouse, but it's not the best, of course. It's just one of the worst mice ever created. But let's start with a regular mouse, and then we're gonna move to something else if you have something else. Otherwise, we can continue. The starting point, it's pretty much whatever you want. I start by tracing the most obvious section. So let's start with this arm, the right arm. So let's start by adding a point, and then let's click, drag and drop, and let's follow the curvature. Here, what I do, I usually hit Option key and I click to continue the curvature, because if I click again, for example, now I have this little bump of the elbow. If I click again, of course, the handle of the previous curvature is too long, so it's forcing this curve to do this like weird shape. In order to avoid, I have to generate a hard cut to this handle. You hold Alt key, and then you click on the vertex that you just generated. So the second handle, the handle that goes outside the line that we trace, is not gonna interfere with our next click, that in my case is gonna be this one. That's perfect. Let's create a little bit of curvature by drag and drop in, and another curvature here, and then here, and then there you go. And we keep going and doing this arm. Of course, during this video, I'm gonna speed up some sections if I don't do anything new. If I repeat the same action over and over again, I'm gonna speed up those small portions just to complete what I'm doing, and then going on the next explanation. So at this point, we trace the entire arm, and sometimes I see other designer or other like illustrator that have a technique of closing the shape. I don't really care. You can keep this shape open, because what we're doing right now with this tracing is just like simply tracing the external part of our character. We're not defining any colors. We're not defining any like elements or 3D elements or like any details. We're doing just the regular shapes, so then in the future we can merge all the shapes that we have, and we can have the base fully closed shape to have a starting point for our colors. So you can totally leave it open. And of course, this trace, if we compare what we did with the design or the drawing, it's completely different, and you can see it's kind of like worse. You know what I mean? Like, this is more detailed because we have like some small parts and then some more like bigger parts, and we have some like pressure change and all these kind of like small details that make this drawing better. But you should totally ignore this at the beginning. Right now we're just simply tracing, we're not doing details, we're not generating the same result. We don't wanna, this is the final trace that is gonna be on top of the finished design or the finished character. So these type of details are coming or will be added only at the end. Don't get confused and don't get overwhelmed by the pressure of making the vector version identical to the drawing version since the beginning. That's the wrong technique. Like, you're gonna get so overwhelmed by details and you're gonna lose the content with like the reality of the drawing, reality of the process. So that can be really frustrating. Let's keep doing it by tracing the rest of the character with the same technique and leaving the shapes open. So a couple of things here. If you notice, my shape is not identical in like a matter of curvature, a matter of details from the shape of the drawing, and that's totally fine, and that's like what you should do. You shouldn't follow strictly this curvature, like we have a bump here and then a little bump and then something like, you shouldn't follow bump by bump because it creates a couple of problems. First, it's like similar to what I told you before. You get distracted by too many details and you lose like the perspective of doing the entire design or like following the step-by-step approach. And also we risk to create too many vertex. Right now also this shape has a lot of vertex. So if in the future I want to change, or at the end I see that the drawing could be improved or the illustration could be improved by changing a bunch of layers, I will be forced to like move one by one layer. And already here it's kind of complicated to maintain a kind of like good looking and consistent shape because we have a lot of vertex. Imagine this shape with the double of this vertex. That would be pretty much impossible to maintain and manage and update. So don't bother by following too many details. We're gonna do these at the end as well with all the final touches and final details. Another thing here, we are in this situation where our the shape, the layout of the body goes underneath the arm. Sometimes I see a designer that they interrupt the shape here and they start a new one going here. This is kind of weird because this part, what I usually do, I continue the shape by completely ignoring the geometry underneath. Like this, it's kind of like the back of the turnip man, so should have maybe something like this. But this is totally like useless type of vertex because we're never gonna show this, the arm is on top. So we can save all this extra work that we don't really need by just doing like a hard cut, just like one vertex at the beginning and one vertex at the end of the area that is not visible. And it's fine, this line will never be shown because, as I said, we are tracing just this area of the drawing that then we're gonna fill with color. So it's fine, what's underneath, we don't care. So just keep going. Perfect, we traced this. So as you notice here, something like the trace is not properly following the shape, but it's totally fine because while doing this curvature, I pulled the handles a lot. And then I created this extra curvature because I didn't want to edit the handle while I was tracing. And this is another suggestion that I like to give. If you're tracing something and this something is going outside the reference of the drawing that you have underneath, just don't bother, keep tracing, and at the end of your trace you can edit the shape and you can make it fit as much as you want. You don't have to interrupt the flow of tracing just to make it look perfect. Like, you can always come back later and you can add a vertex if you want and make it like kind of different and create different curvature. So you are free to do whatever you want. even after you finish tracing your character, you don't have to interrupt your tracing technique just to make it look perfect at the first shot. It's totally fine to make mistakes and then fix them later. So now we have the final body look at the entire main body shape, and as you notice here, I created like a hard cut, just like a long strip, because here we're gonna have the leg on top. So what we have to do right now, let's keep doing these left arm and the two legs. So here there's an interesting situation because we have this left arm that is bended, so we have this type of shape that is kind of weird. We could potentially like closing the shape in this way and then reaching this point, but then when we fill the shape, we could have an overlap here in between this initial point and the final point. This area like could be kind of empty and it could be kind of weird. We don't really want this, so my suggestion and my solution would be to just create another separated shape. So let's keep this arm at this point, and then let's create the other part of the arm as a separated shape. And in this way we can control the color of this thing by not affecting the shape, or like not worrying about how the shape closes and how the vertex interacts between each other. So we're gonna have these two shapes that kind of overlap at this point here, but we don't care. As I said, this is gonna be just our base silhouette to handle filling colors. So now we are at the point that we did pretty much everything, and if we want we can increase a little bit the opacity of this thing to make it more visible. There you go. We have the opacity at 30%. Now our tracing is really obvious, and we notice that we have everything except for the head. So the head, it's kind of complicated because we have a lot of elements, we have a lot of layers. These are the leaves of the turnip, and we have the roots here that are attached to the head. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves that kind of interact with each other, and these shapes are really complicated. So if we would do this with the pen, it would take us a lot to do it, a lot of vertex, and especially this is kind of random. Like we don't need to do these in a really detailed way like we did with the body, because this is a random shape that we don't really care if it's not accurate, it's not precise. We're not gonna edit by detail for every detail. So what I suggest you to do, instead of using the pen tool, I suggest you to use the pencil tool. So the pencil tool is just like the pen tool, but it's freehand. So you can just draw, trace, and keep going and do all the shape that you want. At the end, when you release, automatically Affinity Designer will create the trace with all the vertex that are necessary to create the type of shape. If you have the opportunity and you can, just use tablet. So in my case, I'm using a really old, I think it's like 3 years old. It's an Intuos Wacom tablet. It's really small, it's a regular surface. The cool thing about this has touch functionalities. You see, like I'm moving the arrow here, I'm moving the pointer, and this pencil, like the Wacom pencil, will allow us to like kind of simulating the drawing technique that we were doing before on drawing, but instead of using the mouse, we're gonna use the pen. So it's gonna be kind of more natural, and probably we're gonna have a more natural shape. It's gonna be easier to manage. So let's select the pencil tool and then let's trace these wonderful leaves. And as I said, like we don't have to follow strictly the silhouette of this thing. Like just go free and just follow your instinct. If you want to also change a little bit the drawing underneath, it's totally fine. A thing that I suggest you to do is just like be confident of what you do, because After tracing it, because of the way the system generates all different vertex inside this shape, it's hard to edit. Like, you can see how many vertex the software generated. So now if you want to edit the shape and make it look slightly different, it's really hard to manage all these different vertex. So just completely be confident what you're doing. All the details are gonna come later, just ignore whatever you do. So here, to continue, we have now the root, the base of the leaf that attaches to the head. In order to do it, or in order to continue the shape, you can select the pencil tool or clicking P on your keyboard and then select the last vertex or the open vertex, a final or initial vertex of your shape. Select it and then click. Automatically the system will continue the shape or continue the curve that you have from before. Let's interrupt this here. Let's create a little bit of base and let's merge it with the other one, and that's perfect. So with the same technique, let's continue and let's build all these other leaves. Another quick tip about tracing this part, especially with the pencil tool, could happen that while you're tracing, probably, I don't know, for whatever reason, like your hand gets tired or you hit something wrong or you reach the end of your canvas, you're forced to interrupt this drawing. And if you want to start again, of course, the software cannot merge your curve with the previous one, and it doesn't work like the pencil tool, so you cannot select the previous vertex and just keep doing your next curve and expecting that the software automatically merges and continues your previous curve. So if this happens, my suggestion is to just keep going. No worries, we can merge it later. So let's continue what we were doing here. Let's finish this second part and let's be as crappy as we want. It's totally fine. Okay, at this point, what we can do, we can simply, with the node tool, we can select both vertex, and let's select the first and the second vertex, the two detached vertices that are closer to each one, and then in the node tool panel, just click on this button on top, join curves. Automatically the system will detect these two vertices that we selected, or the two closest vertex from two open curves or two open shapes, and it's gonna merge them, it's gonna bridge them. So now we have one single curve that is just one single manageable, and it's pretty easy. Perfect. And we're done, basically. Let's hide the image before, the image underneath, and as you notice here, this looks awful. It looks really bad. It's like, looks like 2 years old tried to trace something and it was really like something not from an artist or whatever, but it's totally fine. As I said, it's a really long process, and this is just the beginning of all the steps necessary to trace a proper Illustrator vector character. And the technique is completely different from the technique used to draw a pixel character. So this is fine. Now we have everything we need to start and do our real work, like to make it look good and to make it look real. But this starting point is perfect because we trace all the layout, the entire silhouette of our character. We have all these separated shapes that we can use to interact with each other and tap all the different parts. And we have the perfect starting point. No distraction from details, and everything is linear, everything is clear, and we have a good layer separation that we can easily manage. So it's pretty much it for today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel. And if you want, you can spend a couple of minutes to check the support me page on my website, where you can find all different ways and methods to support me, support my channel, and help me to do better videos and better tutorials for you. Thank you again, guys, and I'll talk to you in the next lesson.